Yes, good afternoon, students. So today we will discuss applications of the electric drive. So in that first part is this domestic use. So in case of domestic application, what are the various requirement? One is nearly constant speed. Nearly constant speed is required for each of the individual domestic application. Then after that, second is low torque. Then frequent start. Frequent start. Then after that, comparatively small load duration. Comparatively small load duration, right? So these are some basic requirement which we needed in case of any of the domestic application. So which are the various motor which may satisfy these particular requirement, that are small universal motor, usually series type. These are used for the domestic uses, such as for driving of sewing machine, vacuum cleaners, mixer, electric shaver, hair dryer, small fans, cloth washing machine, etc. So single phase capacitor start induction motor with DOL start is used for domestic refrigerator as well as for the window air conditioner, etc. Right. So here generally we are having various application in case of this domestic use. So number of applications which satisfy, because what is universal motor? Universal motor is a motor which may be applicable across AC as well as across DC supply, which may give, which may operate on AC as well as on DC supply. So this application, number of applications are there, like hair dryer or some mixer grinder, like that. In that case, we are using universal motor series type, right? In addition to that, our main application of the domestic purpose is refrigerator and air conditioner. So what I think you must aware, in case of refrigerator and air conditioner, DC is not applied, because as far as we are talking about DC, that means we are just using some battery, but comparatively load of that particular devices, air conditioner as well as refrigerators, are more. Okay. So due to this reason, what will happen? We are prefer to use capacitor start motor with DOL starter. Capacitor start motor with DOL starter for the application like this air conditioner and refrigerator. For rest of the application, we will prefer to use universal motor series type, right? So that means in our domestic application, two motors are utilized. One is universal motor and second is capacitor start motor. Capacitor start motor is for the heavy load single phase induction motor. Capacitor start motor. Capacitor start motor is for the heavy load, and that is specifically for air conditioner and refrigerator. And for rest of the application, we prefer to use universal motor because this motor may be applicable on AC as well as on DC type, right? Then after that, second specific application is that lift. So in case of lift, we had already aware about it. Second specific electric drive is lift. So in case of lift, what we prefer, we will prefer to use DC series motor, right? In this case, what are the requirement? We need high smooth acceleration torque, high overload capacity, and pull out torque, high overload capacity, high full load torque, then smooth acceleration, so in addition to that, high degree of silence and moderate speed, high degree of silence, then moderate speed. These are the basic requirement for the machine or motor which may be used in lift, right? So in this case, in single phase installation, a shunt type commutator motor is also used. In case of DC motor, so speed control is affected by shunt field variation or variable voltage. So in case of polyphase slip ring induction motor, the speed is controlled by rotor resistance and involved copper losses. So first of all, DC series motor, we had already aware about it because here starting the torque is required to be high, right? Because this motor is always required to start at full load condition. So that's why in case of this lift, we will prefer to use DC series motor, but sometime DC shunt motor with the commutator control may be used. And if already we see during the previous lecture that application of the motor is dependent upon the availability of the supply. So if AC supply, three-phase AC supply is available, then in that particular case, we will prefer to use that slip ring induction motor, three-phase slip ring induction motor, and speed may be controlled by using that Ward-Leonard method, right? Then after that, come to the part of electric traction. This is having the similar type lift. Then after that, next is electric traction. So in case of electric traction, right? Now in case of electric traction, which type of the motor is used? This will be DC series motor. DC series motor is used for electric traction, right? Because which are simple and robust in construction, provide high starting torque and smooth speed, and these are suitable for all types of service, but more particularly for suburban services where high rate of acceleration is essential. Then after that, single phase AC compensated series motor, that is also having the speed current and speed torque characteristics similar to the DC series motor, that may be extensively used for mainline work. Due to poor starting torque, these motors are not suitable for suburban services where stops are frequent. Now see here, what we are saying that these motors are having high starting torque. These DC series motor, these are having high starting torque, right? Due to this, we will prefer to use this motor, right? But there are again, we will just divide it into two parts. One is suburban traction system, and second is urban traction system. Urban traction system, right? In case of suburban traction system, there is a frequent start and stop is required. Frequent start and stop is required because that stoppers number of stops are more, and that will be approximately 2 to 3 kilometer, or maybe at 5 kilometer. There is a distance between the two stops, that will be 3 to 5 kilometer, right? So that means that in case of suburban type traction system, in case of suburban type traction system, these motor are required to be having such type of characteristics that if they will be frequently just started and stop again and again, these will not going, the characteristics of these motor is not going to be effective, right? So this type, in this case, we will prefer to use this DC series motor. DC series motor here is used. DC series motor. Now come to the second part, that means in case of urban traction system, in case of urban traction system, what will happen? Stops are far away from each other, approximately 20 kilometer or even more than that. In case of urban, maybe 50 kilometer or like that, right? So in case of traction system of urban type where distance between the stops is large, in that case this frequent start and stop is not required. Frequent start and stop is not required. That means frequent start and stop of the motor is not required. So here, instead of DC series motor, we will prefer to use the AC series motor. We will prefer to use AC series motor, right? So this is why, because this motor is having almost similar characteristics as that of DC series motor, but here this frequent start and stop is not required. That's why instead of DC series motor, we will prefer to use AC series motor, right? Now come to the part next is that lathe milling and grinding machine. Lathe milling and grinding machine. Now, in case of lathe or milling or grinding machine, lathe, milling, and grinding machine. Right. Now, in this case, in case of this lathes lathes are generally driven by that constant speed squirrel cage induction motor. Right. Constant speed lathe is generally driven by constant speed squirrel cage induction motor, right? But in case of this multi-speed AC motor or adjustable speed DC motor are sometimes also used. Sometime we may use that multi-speed. Sometime this multi-speed AC motor may also be used, right? So then after that come to the milling. Milling machines are usually driven by the constant speed squirrel cage induction motor again. Larger machines such as planer type milling machines have separate motor for each milling head and separate motor for each feed motion. The general practice is to use adjustable speed motors for headstock drive, right? And when we are talking about grinding machinery, here varies considerably in the design of the individual machine. The general practice is to be employ adjustable speed DC motor for headstock drive, right? And constant speed squirrel cage induction motor with grinding wheels mounted directly on the motor shaft extension are used for bench or pedestal grinders. Now see here, in this case, we will just discussing three different types of electrical drive. One is lathe, second is milling, and third is grinding machinery. Then in first case, constant speed squirrel cage induction motor is utilized, and sometime multi-speed AC motor is also used. Then after that, in case of second milling, again constant speed squirrel cage induction motor may be utilized, and this may be in on the other side. In case of grinding machinery, variable adjustable speed motors are used, right? So here, then after that, next is that refrigerator and air conditioner. Next electric drive is refrigerator and air conditioner. Refrigerator and air conditioner. Now, in case of this vapor compression system of the refrigeration, in case of vapor compression system of the refrigeration, motor employed to drive the compressor is thermostat controlled, right? In this case, we are using that motor which may be thermostat control, right? On restarting the motor has to drive compressor against high head pressure. So in this case, motor used should be capable of just developing starting torque of 2 to 2.5 times to that of the hollow torque. The single phase capacitor type induction motor with the DOL starter are usually employed for small units, and for the large installation, high torque squirrel cage induction motor or slip ring type motor are employed. Right, for small type, there are two types of the refrigerator. One is small type and second is large type. So in case of small type, capacitor type motors are used. Capacitor type motors are used, whereas in case of large type, three phase squirrel cage induction motor or slip ring induction motor may be used. In case of refrigerator, there are two categories. One is small refrigerator and second is that commercial, that will be considered as the large refrigerator. So in case of small refrigerator, single phase 230-volt capacitor type induction motor with DOL starter are usually employed for small units, right? For the large installation, high torque squirrel cage induction motor employed for or you may say slip ring induction motor are employed, and for very large plant, synchronous motor driving turbo compressor may be suitable, right? One is another category is very large. Third category, one is small and second is large. Third is very large. So in case of very large, synchronous type motor is employed. Synchronous type motor that is employed, and that is suitable to drive turbo compressor. Then after that, next category is air compressor. So next category is air compressor. So in case of air compressor, next category of the electrical drive is air compressor. So in case of air compressor, this type of the motor is employed. In case of air compressor, slip ring induction motor and synchronous motor are usually employed. Slip ring induction motor and slip ring induction motor and synchronous motor. Synchronous motor are usually employed in case of air compressor, right? So in large size unit, this synchronous motor can be used for power factor correction in addition to driving air compressor if so designed. So squirrel cage induction motor are used for small compressor only. This slip ring induction motor and synchronous motor may be used for that power factor correction also, and in addition to that, squirrel cage induction motor may be utilized for small units also. Then after that, next is the frequency converters. Frequency converters. Frequency converter. So in case of frequency converters, squirrel cage induction motor and synchronous motor are used for driving converter. Nowadays, the due to that recent advances in the field of that SCR, static frequency changes are being increasingly used. In if you say in the old time, we will prefer to use squirrel cage induction motor. Squirrel cage induction motor may be used. Squirrel cage induction motor may be used in the old time, but as for the present scenario, we are using SCR, that means silicon controlled rectifier or thyristor. Thyristor may be utilized for frequency converter. That means instead of squirrel cage induction motor, we will prefer to use semiconductor devices. We will prefer to use semiconductor devices for that frequency converter, right? In case of frequency converter, in present days, we are using semiconductor devices instead of this squirrel cage induction motor. Right. Then after that, next is this belt conveyor. Belt conveyor. Next category is belt conveyor. So in case of belt conveyor are used for most sand. Heavy loads are required to be accelerated. So normal starting current and high starting torque, double cage induction motor with the dual starter or wound rotor induction motor are used, right? So here double cage induction motor is having its application, right? So these motor must be totally enclosed and surface cooled type, as dust remain present in the atmosphere all the time. So in this case, in case of this belt conveyor, what is required? We need starting high starting torque and low current. High starting torque and low current. So in this case, this we are using double cage induction motor. Double cage induction motor satisfy this type of the application. Requirement for this type of the application, right? Then after that, drilling machine. In case of this drilling machine, in case of drilling machines, we are using constant speed squirrel cage or DC shunt or multi-speed AC motor. Constant speed squirrel cage or DC shunt or multi-speed AC motor are used for this purpose, right? Then after that, blowers and fans. In case of blowers and fans, squirrel cage induction motor. In case of blowers and fans, squirrel cage induction motor. Squirrel cage induction motor or synchronous motor. Squirrel cage induction motor or synchronous motor may be used for this specific application, that is blowers and fans. Then after that, another is floor mills. Another application is floor mills. In case of floor mills, so in case of this floor mill, what is required? Pipe, ventilator, or totally enclosed type motor are used, right? So here speed of the motor varies from 600 to 1000 RPM. So generally we will prefer to use squirrel cage induction motor or slip ring type induction motor. Then after that, come to the part printing machinery. Printing machinery. In case of printing machinery, printing machinery. So in case of printing screen, this machinery for constant speed work, such as this driving platens or other small machines, squirrel cage induction motor are used. Wherever we need constant speed work, there we will utilizing squirrel cage induction motor. Now, where line capacity and moderate starting torque permits single phase capacitor motor may be used, right? And in case of rolling process, where the slow forward stroke and quick return stroke is required, two squirrel cage motors, one for each stroke, that are used. So for other purpose, where variable speed motors are required, such as the rotary presses, DC compound or three-phase slip ring induction motors are required, right? With the rotor resistance control or AC commutator control may be used. So for obtaining the steady crawling speed, for inching the process, inching the press, the pony or barring motors is used. So there are different purposes in this printing machinery. In some of the purposes, we will utilize squirrel cage induction motor. In some of the purposes, we will use another type of the motors. So depending upon the required characteristics, different types of the motor may be utilized for printing machinery. This is the end of the lecture. Right? We will meet in next lecture again. Thank you.